Hello and welcome to another episode of Immigration and Mobility Decoded, a podcast about global immigration and mobility. I am excited to welcome the esteemed Greg Liegel to the show today. For our listeners, Greg and I go way back here at Envoy Global. If you've been following us, we've definitely done a ton of webinars in the past, but this is the first podcast we are doing together. Greg, thank you so much for hopping on the show today and excited to chat with you.
Excited to chat with you, and thanks for having me. I'm a little disappointed, to be honest, that I wasn't one of the first guests there, but I'll take it as we get it.
My apologies. We will, we can take that up with our colleague Erin. I think she kind of was. No, I'm just messing with Erin. I don't know what happened there. I think DB and Brendan they just kind of pushed themselves to the front of the line on that one.
You gotta go with the big wigs first.
Exactly. But Greg, we're recording this the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, so I just wanted to kind of ask how your Thanksgiving holiday was. Any travels, anything good like that?
Yeah, so I've been traveling a lot actually lately, which has been good. So family and work. Was down at the Austin Relocation Council a few weeks back, and then the Southern California Relocation Council right after that. Both amazing conferences, amazing sessions, amazing people. Really, really cool to see what everyone's working on in the mobility space, sort of more broadly. And it was really exciting to also be able to share, obviously, a little bit about what we've been working on here at Envoy and how we kind of see the space evolving. For Thanksgiving itself, it was great. We always go down to my in-laws down in Atlanta, so got back from New York late Sunday night, packed up, headed back down Monday morning, and it was great. Certainly the weather was better down there than it is in here. For anyone who's in Chicago listening, you know what I'm talking about when it's 20 degrees, and that's without the wind chill right now. So it was a good Thanksgiving. How about you?
Great Thanksgiving here. Glad you had a great holiday. Most of my family is in the Chicagoland area, so not too much travel involved, but it's always nice to get those days off and just kind of lay back, eat some good food. We have a tradition going where I don't know if you've ever done rollerball, but my brother-in-law organizes a group. So I think that's like year 5 now of rollerball on the Black Friday. So that's always a fun time.
So I had never heard of whirlyball before I moved to Chicago. I think for anyone who's listening who's not from Chicago, it's like, I don't know, how would you describe it? It's like bumper cars with
basketball. Yeah. Except without a bucket, it's you just kind of fling it at the board. It's like part wiffle ball, part bumper cars, part basketball on 10 minutes. Yep, exactly. Super fun. So Greg, before we hop into, I definitely want to chat and learn, talk with you about the conferences and regional events that you've been going to, learn some of those insights, especially as we kind of are looking to wrap the year up and look ahead to 2024. But first, I want to properly introduce you, talk a little bit more about your background. So you are the VP of Product at Envoy Global, and you oversee product management, design, learning, and development. You're responsible for setting the product vision, strategy, and roadmap for Envoy Global. You also help the internal teams within the company, the affiliated law firm, and clients. You help them improve their skills to get the most out of the Envoy platform. Anything I missed?
No, I think that kind of sums it up. I mean, I think one of the kind of the fun things about the job is for me, like from a product and design standpoint, is obviously building software that our clients use, whether our clients are our own teams or they're external customers, or whether they're the law firms that actually use our software on the back end to prepare petitions and so on and so forth. But like seeing sort of the light bulbs go off when they start using it, and they see how it's a very different experience I think a lot of sort of traditional law firms have, and yet it's still complicated at times, right? And so I think bringing those two things together, like you have the customer side of things, and then making sure that they have the support through the learning and development through that, that training piece, I think is really, really powerful. It's a really powerful combination, and it's, lucky to be able to do that on a daily basis.
And bringing those aspects together, it's fascinating when I ever since I've met you, your background. For those who don't know, you hold a PhD in sociology from the University of Chicago, and your research focused on how technology impacts organizations, work processes, and labor markets. And I guess to start, what drew you to those areas of study, and how have you applied those to your career and your current roles? I feel like you have this awesome background in where you are, and just kind of like combining everything.
I think the way that you talk about it now is I think I have what's called a non-traditional background, right? Like a non-traditional career path, if you will. I mean, the short answer is like I got into those areas. I was interested in those areas because I didn't want to be super poor. After I graduated from college, I was working over in Europe doing research, like labor market research. Like I was and still am like a total geek, and was doing a bunch of work on that, and really wanted to stay in Europe. And I'm going to be dating myself by saying this, but it was at the time like right around the first .com boom where things just like exploded, right? And things were taken off. And I think there was some tendency to be like, oh, you're American, you must know something about computers, which of course was not at all true. But it was a way for me to actually stay in Europe. And so that's kind of how I got into tech in the first place was literally just, I wanted to stay in Europe, and working in software is a kind of a way for me to do that, which is probably not what most people want to hear. But the day before I was supposed to fly back to the States, I got a call from a friend who was working at a startup, smaller company at the time. It still exists, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately, but it's sad. So it's a company called Yahoo. Some of you, if anyone who's a little bit older, may have heard of it. But they were thinking about how they were going to roll out e-commerce products across Europe. And so they were looking to hire in that area. And it was, like I said, I was supposed to fly out Saturday. This was Friday afternoon. I gave the woman who was hiring a call and said, hey, I'm super interested. And she was like, when can you come down for an interview? And I said, Monday morning. Hung up the phone, called my parents, said, don't pick me up tomorrow. I'll call you when I figure stuff out. So that's how I kind of ended up in tech. And what was really interesting is, after the whole tragedy of 9/11, some of you may remember that some of the hijackers were all on H-1B visas, or a lot of them were, right? And so, understandably so, like the government came down pretty hard on that program after that. And so a lot of our developers that were sitting in Europe were actually folks that couldn't get their visas renewed here in the US. And so we had like just amazing talent that it's not that uncommon to like, the sort of the current state of affairs, unfortunately, in the US, but where you had these amazing people who couldn't be employed in the United States for a period of time. And so obviously, the company didn't want to lose them. And so they parked them overseas. And I think you see companies are doing that right now. Like if they can't get somebody on H-1B, they might park them up in Canada for a couple, a year, months, or whatever it might be. And so we were doing the same thing, right? And these were people that really had helped develop foundational technologies, FTP, SSL, things that we use on sort of a daily basis. And so at some point, I kind of got to the point in my career at Yahoo where I was like, all right, I either move to California or I move and do something else. And so I made the decision at that point to kind of just do something else. And that's what brought me to Chicago. And I think anytime you have like those career transitions, you're always kind of looking for ways to build bridges and explain why you took a 8-year break to go do something else in between, roles or whatnot. And so I was really interested in this whole idea of, once again, thinking back to those software developers. These are just amazingly talented people that our country doesn't want. Why is that? And so that's kind of how I got interested in the whole, labor market and technology strategy, because it all kind of folds together. Does that make sense?
For sure. So how's your background and your research when it came time to put together your dissertation and just things that you've been learning over the years? How have you applied those to your current position? And since you've been at Envoy and working on the platform and things like that.
Yeah, so a lot of my research was on technology adoption in organizations, and my dissertation was actually more on how do professional associations and companies actually shape economic policy or government policy. And so, like on a day-to-day basis, I would say it's not directly correlated to what I do right now, right? But I think one of the things that you learn going through a place like UFC is you learn how to ask questions, and you learn how to like dig really, really deep to understand what the problem is. And if you can figure out what the problem is, and actually coming up with a solution tends to be the easier side of things, right? Like fundamentally understanding the problem, I think is harder. And so to that extent, what I learned in grad school is something that I use each and every day, right? Certainly, like when I started at Envoy, yes, I had a familiarity with what a green card was or an H-1B was, or that sort of thing. But I didn't have necessarily like incredibly in-depth knowledge about every single visa type and what are all the requirements for this visa type or that. Nothing along those lines, but it certainly has been really helpful in sort of broadly understanding the space, and then being able to go deep into certain areas where you need to have that kind of depth of knowledge in order to be able to understand the problem and then propose a solution that's going to meet the needs of our clients.
Not to date ourselves here, but historically maybe, or within the last 10, 15 years, what were some of the biggest problems within organizations when it came to managing their immigration or mobility programs?
I mean, in some ways, it was sort of the scary thing is a lot of it hasn't changed, right? It's absolutely fascinating to me, and I think it's such an area of opportunity that we're just scratching the surface when it comes to immigration technology or sort of like global mobility technology more broadly. I think we've made massive, massive changes or improvements over the last several years. But in comparison to a lot of other areas, we're still sort of, there's a lot of room to grow and a lot of room to improve. And I think that's actually really exciting because now we get to use all these new technologies and deploy them in really unique ways. But the problems that we're solving are still sort of the core problems that we had, from several years ago. And so to my mind, like when I look at the immigration space, and this from like doing like the Envoy Immigration Trend Survey and things like that every year, right? Mm-hmm. And for the folks that are listening, maybe you can just talk a little bit about that, and then I can kind of bring it back together.
Yeah, so the Envoy Global's Immigration Trend Survey is an annual report based off of a survey of 500 plus HR professionals, mainly based in the U.S., where we ask them their opinions and thoughts on the current state of immigration in the U.S., both from a snapshot in time of do you approve of the administration's handling of employment-based immigration, to more on the employment-based side. What are their common challenges? What are their thoughts on proposals from like DHS or DOL, and things that they would like to see improvements, if you will, the U.S. government to make to the employment-based immigration process, typically which center around like faster processing, more transparency, and just easier way to do things, as well as, you mentioned the H-1B, but, higher number of H-1B visas to be made available. And actually, we are in the process of putting together our 2024 version, which will be out in early Q1 of 2024.
But that's awesome. But we also ask them things like, what are your concerns when you're standing up a global mobility program? Like, what's the stuff that you value the most as, say, an HR professional, or that your employees, value the most, and things like that. And I think we've seen that across like study over study. Like the results they change, but they don't change dramatically year over
No.
year. Like a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same concerns that folks have a couple of years ago, they still have, right? Which makes sense, right? HR professionals are that employee experience is top of mind, right? How they're able to do things like, around reporting, how they're able to get sort of greater insights into their employee population, how they're able to sort of benchmark against competitors and things like that. And so the thing that I think is really exciting is that you have these fundamental problems that clearly exist. And, whether it was at ARC or at SC, RC, or any of these other conferences that you go to, you see the same sort of problems kind of coming up over and over again. And I think we're in a really unique position now as both a company, but also as an industry, to start solving some of these problems in really meaningful ways. And what I get really excited about is how we're actually going to go about and solve them. And I think we're finally getting now to a point, and it's something I think that Envoy candidly has put at the forefront more so than some other solutions out there. Is we're not just building a solution for one audience. We're trying to build a solution that's more holistic, right? So that it meets the needs of HRs, but it also meets the needs of the employees that are impacted. This is like such an important part of their process, right? This is their life's journey. Like the outcome of this is going to determine, can they live where they want to live? Can they work where they want to work? Can they, raise their family where they want to raise their family, and so on and so forth. So that employee experience is really, really important. That HR experience is really, really important. But then there's also the law firm experience, right? How do we make that experience as robust and rich and as seamless for them as possible, so that they can kind of provide the type of amazing service that they want to provide. So I think we've made like some really amazing strides over the last, several years. But I still think we're, there's a lot we can still do, which is super exciting.
Definitely. So actually, maybe if we want to dive into the employee experience side a little bit, I guess in your time in this field, what has traditionally been like the weakest area of the employee experience side, and how has immigration technology such as Envoy helped bridge that gap and improve the employee experience?
So back like when I was in grad school, and I think there's still a lot of firms out there that do this, right? Like immigration was a pen and paper type business, right? Everything was done on pen and paper. Like you might get a questionnaire that was like in a Word document or an Excel file. You'd get an email where they're asking you for certain information. You respond to it. Super, super clunky, super old fashioned. And it's sort of, for anyone who's ever done their own taxes, it's the exact same type of experience, right? It's awful, right? Like nobody likes doing their taxes. Nobody likes filling out, long questionnaires where, it's like, you ever get a PDF where you're trying to fill out that PDF, and for the love of God, they just didn't make that one field an input box. And so you try to type it in, and it either cuts off the letters, it doesn't let you enter the information that you need. You get so frustrated and you want to pull your hair out. And as you can see, like, I can't afford that. Right. And so I think when we think about what the employee experience should be, it's about that, right? It's like, think about all the consumer technology that you use on a daily basis, whether it's Gmail, whether it's, Insta or Snap or any of these other TikTok, any of these other tools out there. They're super easy to use. They're really, really intuitive. I was sitting there with I have two kids, and I was sitting there with one of them last night, and my wife asked, well, how do I do X, Y, and Z on my phone? And my daughter just grabbed it and was like, and handed it over, and was done, right? And she didn't get, there wasn't like a telephone book manual that she had to read to understand how to do that. She just knew how to do it because it was that easy to kind of figure out on your own. And so I think when we think about what the employee experience should be, it's providing for both the employee and the employer that type of ease of use when it comes to these processes that are complex and opaque and not particularly transparent, and so on and so forth. And there's no reason why we can't do that, right?
Right. Do you think that I guess, why do you think that is, that immigration and maybe some historically other platforms or et cetera, that they've been these clunky things, like you mentioned, the comparing it to taxes, where it's kind of like lag behind, where I love the comparison to some consumer brands or B2C, and it kind of makes me think that, like, is there an aspect where some B2B historically, is just lag behind because it's always been done this way? Do you think it's reflective of that, or because immigration, particularly within the US, it's, you have to go through the government for a lot of it. And when it comes to immigration, historically, they've been slow to adopt new digital technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly part of it, right? I think part of it's a question of investment. Building really good products it's not easy. It's certainly not cheap. And so I think having the capital at your disposal to be able to build something like that is really, really important. And I think a lot of, your sort of typical mom and pop immigration law firm isn't going to have access to capital to be able to make that type of investment, right? We're really fortunate in that we can do that. At the same time, I do think that there's a lot of B2B software out there that historically was just like, yeah, it sucks, but it works, right? It gets the job done. It doesn't do it in an easy way, right? And in fact, there certainly are examples from like sort of the history of software development where, most of those companies weren't making their money off the software. They were making their money off the implementation and the maintenance and the training and the, all that kind of stuff that you need to keep that software up and running and upgraded and so on and so forth. So I think you've seen a shift over the last several years, like on the HRIS side of things. I think Workday was one of the bigger ones that sort of initiated that shift, where you have, yes, there's always been sort of human capital management type software, payroll management type software, all that kind of stuff. But how do we make it more intuitive? How do we make it more user friendly? How do we make it easier simply to use for people? And so I think there is this shift in the B2B space, recognizing that we can take these business processes and we can quote unquote consumerize them, right? By making them more intuitive, by making them, are they going to be as flexible and easy to use as like as a TikTok? I don't know. That should be the goal, right? And I think, for example, like going back to the tax example, Intuit's done an amazing job at that, right? Mm-hmm. If you've ever pulled up TurboTax recently and you had previously used TurboTax, they're not asking you to go through and fill out, give us all of your information over the last 10 years again. It's like, hey, let's see what's changed.
Yeah.
Right? Let's see what's changed in your tax situation since last time we did your taxes.
Yeah.
This is the information that we have on file about you. Yep. What do we need to update, right?
Yeah.
And so there's ways of of building that where you're reducing that friction. And by the way, reducing that friction isn't just a better experience; it also produces better outcomes.
Yeah.
Right? Because the data quality is better. There's less escalations and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of really good business reasons, to build in that way as opposed to what we might have done in the past.
Definitely. The TurboTax is such a great example. I know, I think depending on who you ask, anyone's going to have an opinion on TurboTax versus H&R Block versus, I think, Credit Karma now, or another one. But to your point, it is very nice that come that time of the year when you log in, it has all your information. It asks you questions, and depending on your financial background or your background, you could be done with your taxes in an hour or so. Yeah. And to your point, yeah, like, why can't immigration be like that in some ways? Moving to the HR side of things, when you're speaking with either current Envoy clients or fellow industry leaders, what are they looking for, and what are their challenges when it comes to immigration technology or global mobility technologies?
So I think for everyone in our space, right, the last year and a half, 2 years has been hard, right? There's no way around it. whether it's the layoffs, whether it's just sort of the state of the economy, whether it's the political climate when it comes to immigration. It's been challenging over the last few years, COVID and so on and so forth. And so I think the one constant theme that I hear from everyone that I've been talking to is we're being asked to do less with more, right? And I think as a solution provider, a vendor meeting the needs of those clients, we have both a responsibility, but also an opportunity to figure out how do we help our clients do less with more, right? And that's where I think sort of the promise of technology comes in. And that's where I think it gets really exciting is, of course, you could always do it how you've always done it, right? But technology should make your life easier. It should allow you to do things more efficiently, better at scale. And by the way, also then create that space so that service component can really shine through. And so that less with more is, it's not just that those companies have laid off folks. They've also laid off mobility teams. And those mobility teams have, are paying a closer eye on their own budgets and so on and so forth. But now I think that type of pressure can also be a really amazing catalyst to create the type of innovation that I think, we're sort of on the cusp of starting to drive here.
I think maybe that brings us segues into a hot topic within the industry, but also, within tech as a whole. If you've been, we have the whole open AI thing and just AI in general. So I guess, Greg, before we get into any deeper questions, how would you define AI?
Well, even just to take a step back, right, Eric, it's like that's the other topic that's on.
Yeah.
Right? So it's both like, hey, we're strapped here. We got to figure out ways to solve these problems and still continue to provide the service that we want to provide at a lower price point. And by the way, what's AI and how's that going to impact global mobility? Is it going to take people's jobs? What's it going to do, right? And so I think all of the regional relocation councils for people who are in that global mobility space, what's really exciting is that they're doing a lot of work and putting on some really fantastic programming around this. Because it is an important topic for, all HRs to understand and understand how it's going to impact the work that they do. It's going to impact how their vendors are operating and so on and so forth. But I think one of the conversations I've had over the last couple of weeks is one of the most important parts is to understand, what do you actually, AI broadly, what do you actually want to get out of it? What's your goal in terms of how you would deploy those types of technologies and to what ends and so on. And so I think if you take a little bit of a step back and think about what AI is more broadly, it's like people are like, oh my gosh, open AI, it's all new. And it's like, well, hold on, it's not, right? Like AI has been around for a very, very long time. And if you think about, there are, many different flavors of it, and those different flavors are particularly suited to some tasks in one particular situation, and they're better suited for other tasks using different tools and so on and so forth. So I think understanding fundamentally what you as an organization want to accomplish, that's the more important question. And then it's about figuring out what are the tools that are going to help you accomplish those tasks. Now, some of those may be AI related, some of them may not be, right? If you're going through and you have an enormous amount of back office work where it's literally copying, this file from this folder to this folder, or from, this invoice over into this folder or whatever, there you're going to look at probably something more like robotic process automation or something like that. You don't necessarily need, it's not AI, but there are sort of intelligent automation tools out there that can help streamline that processes and make you a hell of a lot more efficient in that regard. There's other situations where you're going to want to say, hey, I need to understand what's coming down the pipe in terms of, I need to be able to predict a certain set of information or outcomes or things like that. And that's sort of like the machine learning and the natural language processing models and things like that can be really, really helpful in that type of situation. And then, of course, then you have the whole, OpenAI, which is the current craze things right now.
Is AI? I guess what's the current state of AI? Like, can it predict renewals or like when HRs need to take certain actions?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, immigration is an incredibly data-driven process in business, right? And even without AI, you don't need AI to be able to determine, hey, when's Greg's H-1B going to require an extension or a renewal or whatnot. It is, however, it's one of the big advantages of having technology, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're if you're working with a traditional law firm who does everything on pen and paper and maybe tracks the stuff in a spreadsheet, they may be able to tell you when my H-1B is going to expire, but it's going to be harder for them to be able to do that proactively and to manage all that data and so on and so forth. That's, I think, one of the advantages that we have is we can say, hey, Eric's H-1B is expiring on December 30th, Greg's is expiring on February 1st, and so on and so forth. And we can automatically surface that in our application and then prompt people to take the necessary action in a timely fashion to make sure that, you don't fall out of status and to make sure that no businesses are, the business isn't impacted in any sort of way. You don't need necessarily AI for that, but there are certainly other things that I get really excited about thinking about, like, how do we provide better service to clients? And how do we prevent some of those questions that typically would come in? How do we prevent those types of questions from happening in the first place? And if we have all the data, and if we can crunch that data and we can say, all right, we know that, for example, Greg's case is going to get filed in 5 business days. And we can tell you that, right? Like, I can tell you with a high degree of certainty that your case is going to get filed in 5 days. That's really powerful, right? That's not looking backwards. That's looking forward and telling you this is what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And then all the way, if you do that correctly, then you start to build trust with that person, right? Oh my God, he said my case was going to be filed in 5 days, and guess what? It was. There's also things you can do around sentiment analysis, where I go through and I look at all your communications to me, and I can tell when you're really upset, right? I can tell when you're happy. I can tell when you're upset. And you can use sentiment analysis and tools like that to, once again, provide better service for those individuals who are, terrified that or upset or whatever it may be, that something's going on, something that could potentially negatively impact their career or their family or whatever that might be. And so you can provide better service. But once again, it comes back to that, that point I was trying to make a couple of minutes ago. What is your goal and why are you trying to deploy these tools?
Yeah.
Right. Don't deploy a tool just to deploy a tool.
Yeah.
Right. Have a clear goal in mind about what you want to accomplish that, and then find the right set of tools that actually help you, do that effectively.
When speaking at or when attending the events that you've gone to, I guess zooming out, how would you say? Hold on, I'm going to scrap this. I gotta scrap that. Okay. So I guess, Greg, just looking ahead, we are recording this, as we mentioned, post Thanksgiving, at that time of the year when we're looking ahead to the new year. How do you see AI's influence on immigration programs and global mobility programs continuing to play out in 2024?
So I think it's going to play out in a number of different areas, right? Once again, my personal goal with it is how do we make our internal teams more efficient? And by making them more efficient, how can we provide better service to our clients, on both the legal side, the HR side, and the employee side of things? And there's a whole bunch of different tools that we're looking at that we're going to, hopefully deploy in different ways to accomplish sort of that broader service goal. And that's really, if we can do that, then we can be more efficient, right? So we can provide quicker answers. That's one way that we can use AI. it's amazing right now. You referenced OpenAI or ChatGPT a few moments ago. It's fantastic, obviously, at summarizing information. That can allow us to provide a quicker, better answer. Right now, obviously, it's subject to oversight and reviewing it thoroughly and making sure that it's accurate and things like that. But I think there are tools like that where it's going to facilitate communication. It's going to facilitate writing. So an example might be something along the lines of, how do we use AI to provide better help text across our application, right? Machine translation. I was actually in the elevator on the way up today. There was has like one of those little TVs in the elevator, and of course you stare at it as you're going up to the 27th floor here. And there was something about like how Amazon's deploying this new tool around like machine translation in 100 different languages, and they promise an accuracy of 98% or whatever it was. But I think those are things where you can take those tools and think about the experience you can provide, right? Like if someone's coming in and English isn't their first language and we're asking them for, what's their highest degree of education, that can mean different things in different languages, right? And that might be a bad example. But how do we translate it on the fly for them? So we're presenting that in Spanish or in French or in German or Hindi or whatever that may be, and giving that to them, like serve it up to them on a silver platter. You have a question about this? Here, we can help you answer that. Once again, it helps us then too, because then we get better data around it. So I think there's around that customer service part. I think it's going to do a lot there. I think we're going to be looking at, you started to see this at work out in Boston too, where, companies are looking at AI as a way of extracting data from documents and things like that. Once again, to sort of reduce that questionnaire burden that folks have, because we need that information to be able to send that petition off to USCIS, but it's a question of how do we get that information? Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of tools out there that are going to really sort of more broadly improve that customer experience. And by improving that customer experience, freeing up lawyers, paralegals, other mobility teams to provide better service across the board.
Is there an element of, improving the service? Is there maybe like a gamification element to it where you want to help, but in order to, teach models or to glean those insights, you need, whether they're HRs or foreign national employees using the platform and services to complete certain tasks, to, do action A, do action B, action C. How are those at all related?
So we do use some gamification in our application right now. It's more about providing a richer onboarding experience for folks. People like tasks, they like checklists, right? And they like checking stuff off and seeing that everything is, you get your green check mark. So we do use some of that, mostly to help provide a really rich onboarding experience for folks. I think anytime you're transitioning into a new application, whether it's as a completely new client or that client, an existing client hiring somebody new, there's always going to be a little bit of ramp up time. And so how do we reduce that ramp up time as much as possible and get people oriented and on their way and feel like that they are properly settled and they know what they need to do and they know how to do it. So we can kind of gamify that experience. At the same time, providing some more contextual support around some of those more challenging areas to make sure that they don't feel like they're on their own, to make sure that they feel like they have that support across that entire immigration journey. So we're not so much gamifying the data collection piece as figuring out ways of providing support in meaningful ways that helps our clients accomplish what they need to accomplish, while at the same time making sure that they have the tools to do that successfully. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's awesome and interesting to hear, as I think that kind of ties a little bit back into your, what we were talking about earlier, where in the old days there was like B2B companies under this mindset of like, well, that's just kind of how it always is and it's how it's always worked. But I know hearing some of those elements, incorporating them into the Envoy platform just reminds me of some of these other like B2C, either mobile apps or you're just kind of borrowing that to really like, it's like, why can't we do this?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that should be the expectation of a client when they're looking for a vendor. That should be their expectation, that whatever solution that they go with can provide that level of interaction and support and hand holding and so on and so forth. It's funny because I was talking to my daughter just turned, she's old enough now, I'm dating myself here, but she's old enough now to get her learner's permit for driving. And I was like, all right, well, if you want to get it, you got to take apparently in Illinois, you got to take a driving class because their school doesn't offer that. And I was like, so Google, figure out where the nearest driving school is, call them up and ask them what you need to do. And her response was like, wait, you want me to talk to somebody? Like, I don't want to talk to anybody, right? Like, why can't I just, text with them or chat with them? But her point is like, as silly as I found that, like she's right? Like,
yeah,
people want to help, and certain people want to pick up the phone. Certain people want to email, right? Certain people don't want to have to talk to anybody. They want to be able to watch a video, read a quick article, and get the help and support that they need to move on their way. And so I think as like an organization, we're trying to meet those users where they are, where they want that support, where they need that help. And if they need to talk to somebody, obviously we will always provide that to them, but we want to do it in such a way that the more we can reduce the amount of interaction. So for example, our customer experience team is having with those folks, the more time that customer experience team actually has to provide amazing white glove service to those people that really, really need it. Right. So like if there's a question that comes in around, I don't know, like something silly, like how do I reset my password? Right. Do you really need to talk to a customer experience person to figure that out? No, you shouldn't have to, right? It should be really intuitive how to do that. And if it's not intuitive, there should be tools that provide that support exactly where you need it to, which is forgot password, click, how do I do that, right?
Yep.
And so I think there's a whole bunch of support infrastructure that we're going to be able to build out around our application and sort of more broadly within the space that provides that type of customer experience that people are really looking for and candidly they deserve.
Yeah, definitely. I will say I definitely share that sentiment of not wanting to talk to people on the phone.
Okay, come on, just pick up the phone.
Yeah. Still something I do. But yeah, no, I hear you on that. That definitely there are some of those instances where like you don't need to talk to that live person if you're able to provide that value, that information up front. I think it's also a level of trust, right? You're going to trust that if you provide the answers, that person is going to find it and they're going to click around and all that.
100%. And I think, that theme of trust is something that's so, so important, particularly in our space. I mean, we deal with medical records and financial records and really like intimate details of a person's entire, life history and that of their family. And so we have to work every single day to earn that trust and maintain that trust. And I think there's a lot of ways that you can show that, but, and that's everything from the security measures that we put in place. Like we spend an enormous amount of time and energy on data security, right? But that's the right thing to do given the type of data with which we're dealing and the responsibility that we have to the people with whom we work and so on and so forth. But there's also then the trust in what we're showing you is accurate and timely and correct and so on and so forth. And that the support we're providing is accurate and timely and contextually relevant for, the question you might have. Those are all different elements of trust. And so bring that all together. Like if you do that successfully, that's when sort of the magic happens. That's when sort of that light bulb goes off and you're like, oh my God, this is awesome, right? I know exactly where I am in the immigration process. I know what I need to do next. I have full confidence that my data is being treated properly and securely. I have full confidence in my legal team that if I have a question that they're going to pick up the phone or they're going to hop onto a thread with me and answer my question. all of that together, right? That's the type of client experience that you want to provide. And, I think there's a lot of industries that do a fantastic job of that. And I think, we're certainly moving strongly in that direction. And hopefully we just continue to, continue down that road.
Speaking of roads, what's ahead for you and the Envoy Global product team in 2024 that you're able to share?
I can't tell you that.
Thought I'd try.
Yeah, no, it's like tons of exciting stuff. Little too early to talk about that in detail. I think the themes that we've talked a little bit about here today are certainly going to be relevant going into next year. For my team, on the training side of things, we're rolling out actually a couple new features. Well, on the training and on the support side of things, we're rolling out a couple of big features actually next end of this week, which I'm super excited about. That is going to provide much, much better support within the application for HRs and for foreign nationals. It's even going to provide dedicated support for individual companies within that, which will be really exciting. So I'm super excited about that one. We certainly will be spending more and more time on mobile next year. I don't think there's any particular secret about that. It's how people are operating right now, right? Like, do you have a scanner at home? Probably not. Maybe you do, but probably not, right? And yet, if you think about immigration, it's a really document-heavy business. Well, how do you get those documents if you're an employee, right? Maybe you take them into work, but we're all remote now. So how do you capture a picture of your passport or a picture of your marriage certificate or whatever it is? So I think there's things that we can do in that regard that help streamline that process, the data collection process, and things like that. So a lot of the big projects that we have, I think we'll be keeping within some of the broader themes that we've talked about here today, is how do we improve the client experience for the foreign national? And by improving the foreign national experience, you can also, by the way, it helps improve the HR experience, right? Because you don't have someone knocking on your door. I was talking with somebody out in LA a couple of weeks ago, and they're like, every day I go out and it's awesome. I have my whole day planned. It's fantastic. All right. I have this time blocked off to work on this project and this project. And invariably someone comes by and they just knock on my door and they're like, hey, I'm traveling tomorrow, and how is this going to impact my visa status or whatever? And their day just gets blown up, right? So how do we help them, their day not get blown up, right? Are there things that we can do to help give them a little bit more clarity around that so that they can just absorb that and, it doesn't, sort of shake them. So we're going to be doing a lot of stuff in that regard. But we'll get into more details as we get closer and we actually start rolling that out. I always learned, my wife was in sales and I learned the hard way. You never tell a salesperson what you're going to build before you actually build it, because, they'll go out and sell it. And I'm not going to let you give you that either.
No, all good. I think that's, everyone will just have to stay tuned and be sure to check out envoyglobal.com.
There'll be some cool stuff coming.
Awesome. Sure. Glad to hear. Well, Greg, I've had a great time chatting with you more about the space, AI, and other technology, but I kind of wanted to wrap things up to just talk a little bit more on how you, as an industry leader, how you operate in your day-to-day and also just throughout your career. You started, you build the product roadmaps, you oversee it. And a lot of the focus today has been on AI, just using that term generally. But as you know, there are technologies that pop up that are like the hot new thing. Not saying you're always going to incorporate them in immigration, but if we think to a few years back, right, everyone was talking like crypto or Web 3.0, and now no one talks about those. How do you balance things of interest, hot interest? They're always in the news. You're just seeing them everywhere. How do you balance those with the unknowns when building a product roadmap? Like, you have your goals and objectives, but a lot of people are talking about the hot new thing.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Eric. I think it comes back to also going out and actually just talking to people, understanding what their problems are and why they have those problems. Obviously, it's absolutely critical to stay current on new tech that's being rolled out, how people are using it, what your competitors are using it and why. I think your point earlier around about AI sort of being the current buzzword or flavor of the month is true. It's not to say that it's not going to fundamentally change things. I think it clearly is, and it already has in a lot of ways. But I will stand fast by that comment I had earlier about what are your problems that you're fundamentally trying to solve, and then figure out tools that solve those problems. Now, a lot of the tools that solve those problems don't need to be the shiniest new object on the block, right? Like, there's a lot of problems that can be solved, a lot of low-hanging fruit that can be addressed by long existing technology out there. I think too, it's about looking across into other industries, under other spaces, and seeing how people have solved similar problems in different domains. And I think, like, from a product perspective, I think that's one thing that product managers tend to do really well is they like actually going out and talking to customers and understanding what their problems are. And if they don't, they probably shouldn't be in product management, right? So understanding your clients, understanding what their problems are and why they have those problems, and understanding, like, not just, hey, why do you do X, Y, and Z, but really understanding, like, 5 times, ask that, right? There's this whole framework around the 5 whys. Ask why 5 times, and then you'll finally get to, like, an answer that's kind of interesting. But the more you sort of start peeling back that onion, then you really get into what that core problem is. How you solve that core problem is a different question. Maybe you need RPA for that. Maybe you need, maybe you need generative AI for that. Maybe you need natural language processing or optical character recognition or some tech out there that is going to go ahead and help you address that problem. But the technology isn't the problem. The technology is a way of helping solve the problem in the first, right? And so it's a little bit different. Like, you got to be able to understand what's out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use the newest, best thing out on the market to solve what's potentially a pretty easy problem if you just kind of understand it really thoroughly.
Got it. Definitely. Any advice for folks trying to grow their careers as product managers?
I don't know if I'm, like, once again, like, I have, like, the unorthodox career path, so I don't know if I'm the best one to give out advice on these types of things. I think the same advice I would give on almost anything is, like, be curious, be willing to go deep, but try to also be able to step back and see the forest through the trees. Those are the types of skill sets that I think are never going to go out of style, and are going to serve you really, really well, regardless of what you end up doing. I do think you have to be interested in the domain in order to really be successful. If it's a domain space that you're like, I could sort of take it or leave it, are you going to really be able to and interested and willing to put the time in to really fundamentally solve or understand the problem at a really deep level? And I've been fortunate, throughout my career to have a whole bunch of those, whether it's, e-commerce, whether it's, online marketing, whether it's immigration now and sort of mobility more broadly. Those are all things that I'm just deeply interested in, right? Like, these are industries that have really interesting problems. And so I'm, like, super, super fortunate to be able to try to solve some small part of those. Oh, and just work with really smart people.
Love it. Love it. Well, Greg, any final thoughts that we didn't get into? Anything you'd like to plug? Where can listeners find you, interact with you, things like that?
Not huge on social media. I'm on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn, anyone has any questions, obviously delighted to talk. I could geek out about this stuff all day long, as you know, unfortunately. Like we've had enough webinars together where you're like, oh my God, stop talking. But more than happy, if folks do have questions or, ideas, would love to hear from people. But it's been awesome talking. I appreciate the
Definitely.
time.
Yeah, of course. We will have you back on maybe when some of those little sneak peeks you were mentioning are released. We can chat more about those. What does next year look like for you in terms of events? People can find you at corporate roundtables, regionals, national events, things like that.
I think we'll probably go to BAM in I guess March. I think we're still kind of working out what that schedule is going to be. So hopefully they'll let me out of the stable and let me go to some of it's fun. And you learn a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like it's super interesting to meet people that are having like different problems in slightly different areas. Maybe that's in relo, or maybe that's in global tax or things like that. But it's like, how do you take all those little different puzzle pieces and compile it into one puzzle is the really fun and exciting part. And so I love going to those because I've never gone to one where I've walked away and been like, I didn't learn anything new. Right. I'm always learning something new with those.
Love it. There you go. Awesome. Well, Greg, thank you so much for the time today. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it. Take care.
You too.